And now to introduce tonight's speaker, Shandy Danford. Shandy?
Thank you, Tim. Just quickly before I introduce Anna, if club members are interested in the, June 15th outing for the first annual Shadowrama on the South Umpqua, please reach out so that I can keep track of camping spots at the RV park on the river. And that is a Wednesday. It's a midweek outing. You can walk and wade, pontoon, drift boat, raft, whatever. And I will be taking care of the shuttles. And that's it. So I would like to introduce Anna Baklund, who I met a few years ago riding dirt bikes, of all things, up at Willamina for a poker run that my club was putting on. I was doing some photography for it and got some pics of Anna and just kind of started messaging back and forth. And then we realized that we were friends with J. Michelle Swope, who was our first presenter back in November, I believe. So 6 degrees of separation here. Anna is an avid outdoors woman, an amazing dirt bike rider. She can catch a fish easily, snow bikes, really anything she puts her mind to. And, you know, we are a club that is supposed to be embracing conservation. This is not a fly fishing conservation presentation per se, but it all comes around out on the wash at the end of the day. So let's please welcome Anna and see what we can get out of her TreadLightly program, which she is a new member of. Anna.
Awesome. Hi, thanks, Shandy. Let's see. I guess before I jump onto a presentation, I'll just introduce myself. Like Shandy said, my name's Anna, and I'm the program manager for Washington and Oregon for TreadLightly. As Shandy also mentioned, I love anything outdoors. My outdoors journey started kind of late. I didn't do a whole lot of camping or hiking, definitely no dirt biking growing up. It just wasn't even on my radar. And then I had a partner who sort of reintroduced me to everything, and I quickly latched on to all of it. Started with hiking and camping. He introduced me to fly fishing, which I absolutely fell in love with. I grew up around the water, so I love being around the water, period, whether I'm catching or not. Dirt biking fell right in there. I went out and bought a street legal dirt bike, having never rode one before, because why not? You only live once, and it looked like fun. Fast forward to now, and I'm out on my dirt bike most weekends. Sometimes there's some fishing in there. Yeah, and I was lucky enough to fall into these groups of people, both in the fishing world and in the dirt biking world, that really had conservation and stewardship and volunteering and giving back sort of on the brain. And they sort of coached me up on why, you know, why do we give back? Why are we worried about conservation and sustainability? And it's become a passion of mine, both personally. Before I was with TreadLightly, my message has been responsible use, regardless of what you're doing, but especially for the OHV community, right? The off-road community. So I volunteer a lot. Last year, I had roughly 600 volunteer hours out on public lands. We do a lot of volunteering dirt bike wise. It might be clearing debris off the trail, or repairing trail tread, or clearing out drainages. When I'm fishing, it's more along the lines of picking up garbage that other people have left behind. But yeah, that's sort of like me in a nutshell. Like Shandy said, there's not a whole lot I don't do. We dirt bike, we ADV, we fish, we snow bike, we have e-bikes, we snowshoe, we hike, we camp. Like, we just enjoy the outdoors. And my partner and I really hope that we can continue to enjoy that access, but it starts with conservation and stewardship and sustainability so that we can continue to have that access. So that's me. Oh, I've got something in the chat already. Snow bike, great question. A snow bike is a dirt bike and you take the wheels off of it and you put a ski on the front and a little bit more narrow of a track, like a snowmobile track on the back. They're not as stable as sleds, as snowmobiles, but they are much more agile, much more nimble. You can get into the trees and weave around. They're very tippy. You wouldn't want to tip over. They're a little heavy and a little tall to get back up on once you're, thigh deep in the snow. But they're a lot of fun. We've been up in all the mountain ranges, the Cascades just has incredible sledding. And I'm going to say sledding because snowmobiles, snow bikes, you're all out there doing the same thing. Good question. It's just such a part of life that I forget that not everybody knows. Okay, let's see. I'm going to pull up my presentation real fast. Bear with me. I was telling Tim, for being a millennial, I am not super savvy with technology. I can do Instagram, I can do Facebook, but the presentations are kind of new to me. Okay. Yeah, you bet, Todd. All right. Okay. So there's the PowerPoint. And we're going to put it in slideshow. And we're going to start. There. Perfect. Okay. So today, can you see? Yeah, there. Hi. Okay, here we go. So today I'm going to chat with you guys about who TreadLightly is, some of the issues that are facing the outdoor community, how TreadLightly is working to combat those issues, and then I'll dive into our outdoor ethics, something that we call the Tread principles, and how we can all do our part to keep access open and recreate responsibly. I know Shandy said that it's not necessarily fishing focused, but TreadLightly has activity specific ethics for everything motorized and non-motorized. So we will actually touch on that stuff. I'm not going to tell you guys how to dirt bike responsibly, right? That's not applicable to what you guys do. So some of you guys might be familiar with who TreadLightly is. For those that aren't, we're a nationwide nonprofit, and we're dedicated to protecting recreational access through ethics education and stewardship. We were created by the Forest Service back in 1985 to address concerns surrounding the growing number of off-road users and the impacts it was having on public lands. And then in 1990, TreadLightly was transferred to the nonprofit sector so that we can maximize the program's effectiveness. And like I said, TreadLightly is the only organization in the nation for both motorized and non-motorized recreation ethics. So for the last 30 years, we've been working collaboratively with land agencies like the Forest Service, BLM, state land managers, Fish and Wildlife, and so on. Industry partners like Polaris, BF Goodrich, Bronco with Ford, enthusiast clubs, and our members and volunteers to promote responsible outdoor recreation, again, through those stewardship projects and ethics that supports sustainable use of our public lands and waterways. That way we have opportunities for generations to come. So,
You're muted, Anne.
oh, I am. Okay, how long was I muted for?
Well, when you put up that slide.
Oh, okay, perfect.
just for a minute.
Perfect. So that leads me into why TreadLightly was even needed in the first place, right? Increased and irresponsible recreation. We've all sort of seen that in the last couple of years in the era we're living in. So it's important to shine a light on these issues. I try not to be negative, but we have to identify the problem in order to come up with solutions. So these are examples of what not to do if we want to keep our access open. None of the pictures that I'm going to show you guys are going to surprise you. We've all seen it when we're out on public lands. Some of these are actually my own photos from areas that I have visited. Yeah, so we'll jump into it. The littering and dumping and what I'm going to call abandonment, like that boat. And we start seeing cars and RVs and boats left behind. Dumping just doesn't seem to cover that large scale. And then we're seeing a lot of just littering in general, right? We're seeing it alongside of the roads that lead out to public lands. We're seeing it at campsites and trailheads and popular viewing spots and up and down our waterways. You guys, my computer's having an issue. I'm going to turn off the video so that I have better bandwidth. Okay.
Sounds good.
Bear with me here. There we go. Perfect. So yeah, and then vandalism. I can't tell you how many signs I've seen shot up or just flat missing. Reader boards are graffitied. Camp tables carved with all kinds of obscenities. Fences getting cut and torn out and rammed out, gates being, torn out and rammed out. Ooh. There we go. Damage to natural resources and irresponsible behavior. This could come from folks not staying on designated roads and designated trails, which get us to our fishing spots. It could come from maybe folks cruising up and down a shallow waterway, which ultimately affects fish habitat. And all of that stuff sort of tells land management that some people aren't respecting the land, and it brings into question if any of us should have access at all. And then some of it comes down to money. Sadly, there's a lack of government funding. And on top of the issues I just mentioned, pile on other issues land managers face, like natural disasters, your wildfires, your floods, your landslides, and then cue all of the normal maintenance, like maybe a boat launch restoration or remediation, as well as all the stuff that they haven't been able to get to yet, all of the backlogged maintenance. And I didn't even mention, the need for education and maybe law enforcement. You can see how quickly it all piles up, especially with the number of increased recreationists out there. It would take a lot of money and a lot of manpower to make it all happen. And those resources just aren't available to our land managers right now. So if these problems continue, we're going to lose access, especially in the off-road community. I've seen a lot of loss of access over the last couple decades, citing just the reasons I mentioned before. But that's where TreadLightly comes in. Our goal is to improve recreationist behavior through education and outreach, and then to minimize our impact through that education, but also through our stewardship projects. So what's stewardship? In its most common definition, it means to supervise, conduct, and responsibly manage something that's entrusted to our care. For us at TreadLightly, stewardship's the foundation by which our programs are centered and built. It's at the very core of who we are as an organization. Stewardship is the way we educate through example. It's the way we give back. It's the way we encourage that culture of responsible recreation. It's how we tell our story. And sometimes actions speak louder than words. I've got a question from Tim that says, does TreadLightly collaborate with county watershed councils? I have not personally yet in my region. I know that we have done some of that in other parts of the nation. If you guys have certain issues you'd like me to look into where you think education or stewardship could be beneficial, I'm all ears. Great question, Tim. Thank you. All right. So what does stewardship look like? Stewardship can take a lot of different forms depending on the user group or an individual's abilities, and then the needs of the land or the trails. Sometimes it's as simple as picking up garbage. Other times it's partnering with the land manager on like large scale water restoration efforts or a structure project like a new kiosk or a staging area or a bridge. There's so many ways that folks can help, and it doesn't always have to be a full day's work. It doesn't always mean heavy lifting, but every little bit helps. So who can be a steward? Stewardship can be something you do by yourself, with a couple of buddies, or as part of a group or a club. How I like to think about stewardship is what could threaten access in this area. So a few examples, out in Greenwater, Washington, trash is starting to close down that area many, many times in the last couple decades. So the solution is pretty easy. Go out, pick up trash, and you take away that concern. So back in June of last year, we partnered with the Snoqualmie Ranger District and a couple great overlanding groups, and we removed 3,000 pounds of garbage. Most of that was dump items like mattresses, and then there was a lot of trigger trash like shell casings. But what really stands out is that it didn't take an army to accomplish that project. We had 11 people out there for a couple hours, and they netted 50 bags of trash. Another one down at Table Mesa in Arizona, there's multiple user groups all utilizing the same area, but there was some confusion over the motorized trails versus the non-motorized trails. So again, another fairly straightforward solution, get some new signage out there. So we put out new signage with quality maps that educates people about where they can be. For that one, we partnered with the BLM, Overland Expo, Casey Highlights, Keep Our Desert Clean, and Fieldcraft Survival. And we installed 12 new signs and kiosks. And not only do they have maps, but they have recreation tips for folks. Another one, along the Nathrop Trail in Colorado, they were struggling with a trail falling into disrepair, which we're seeing more and more of. There's not enough volunteers and enough helping hands to get trails clear. And once they fall into disrepair, they're threatened with closure. So the solution there, we got our hands dirty. We partnered with the Colorado Flat Fender Club and Colorado Off-Road Enterprise, and we just cleared trail debris and blocked off illegal go-arounds. And if you're looking how to get involved with TreadLightly or a TreadLightly project, to figure out maybe what's happening in your area, just drop me a line and I'll be able to get you connected with something happening, or maybe you have an idea, something in mind for a trail project or a restoration effort or a cleanup. And all you have to do is go out to our website, go to stewardship, go down to programs, and then you scroll down, you can submit a project, and then the drop down is there, and you enter your information, and we can get something going. Perfect. Education. So we work to educate folks in a variety of ways. One of the ways we do that is through our tread principles, which walk folks through how to be responsible in the outdoors. And I'll be going more in depth about that here in just a few minutes. We also have our recreation tips, which are activity specific, because each activity has its own set of concerns and hurdles. I've shown a couple on this slide, but we have more activities out on our website. We've also ran some really successful targeted campaigns that draw attention to specific aspects of the TREAD principles, like Respect and Protect, which focuses on avoiding sensitive areas and protecting historical and cultural resources, which has been very helpful in places like Utah. We also have a Ride on Designated Roads, Trails, Areas, which focuses on traveling responsibly, staying on the trail, which is applicable basically everywhere. Another way we educate is by holding day-long courses that go over some of the information I'm sharing with you guys tonight, as well as a bunch more. But in order to hold those classes, we need teachers. So we have what we call our Tread Trainer program, which teaches folks how to go out into the community and teach the TreadLightly ethics. We also have a Master Tread Trainer program that coaches folks on how to be tread trainers. So sort of a teach the teachers. We also have some very simple resources for folks wanting to learn more online, like our 101 awareness course, which is a half-hour course that teaches some of the TreadLightly basics, as well as how to minimize our impact in the outdoors. We also have some fun youth courses and kids games to get the younger crowd involved. So how do we connect with people? How do we get the word out? Essentially, we try to be in as many places as we can and talk to as many people as we can. We show up to events and rallies and races. We show up to expos and conventions. We sit in on our local enthusiast club meetings. We set up shop at trailheads. Sometimes we jump on webinars and podcasts like I am tonight. And then beyond the in-person ways we reach folks, our marketing and communications team at TreadLightly works really hard to put out content on our social media platforms and YouTube and different publications around the country. We've also had a lot of success partnering with local tourism boards to get information out. The tourism board in Utah, we ran, I don't know, it must have been 15 different short articles that talked about recreating responsibly in general. And they saw really positive feedback from that. Our partners have also been super instrumental in spreading the TreadLightly ethic and message. When big industry partners, those big manufacturers, those big names get behind the message, our efforts can echo further. Part of that outreach is telling the story. So the whole team pulled together this year, especially to make sure that we're tracking our metrics and then sharing them. And my personal hope is that folks see these metrics, they see the good that's happening, and they want to be part of it and get involved. 2021 was a big year for the TreadLightly team. We have kind of a goofy fiscal year. I know it says, October to September, but in the 21 calendar year, we attended roughly 50 events and hosted roughly 50 stewardship projects. Some of the things that really stand out for me is the amount of trash that we have hauled off public lands. And that's just TreadLightly, and also the amount of people we're able to get involved. We're waiting to sort out the nitty-gritty details, but I can tell you guys that we've got some awesome industry partners that are looking to do a ton of stewardship projects this year. So I'm sure you're asking yourself how we accomplish everything that we do, how TreadLightly manages to do all of this. Some of that, how we do that is through grants that we receive from the different land agencies. Just broadly speaking, one of the ways is through grants. We utilize both federal and private grants. And again, we have some great industry partnerships that help fund our work as well. We're also able to fund our projects through our memberships. So individuals or clubs or companies can sign up for a membership, and it goes directly back into stewardship projects and education. So finally, all of this brings us to the TREAD principles and recreation tips. The TREAD principles are the overarching ethics that guide us on how to recreate responsibly, regardless of the activity we're taking part in. And then the recreation tips dive into the specific activity we're partaking in. For fly fishing, I grabbed from several different activities because we're not just fishing. We're off-roading, we're hiking, we're camping, we're boating, and we're fishing. So before I move on to the actual principles, I want to just take a minute to quickly outline what the term ethics means, seeing as I've mentioned it quite a few times now. It can mean a set of principles or values that guide behavior, which is exactly what our TREAD principles are. It can mean socially defined obligations over and above self-interest. This one really hits home for me personally, above self-interest. It really speaks to the fact that if one person does something out of line, it affects all of us. Somebody leaving their garbage behind, along the river can turn into a loss of access for the rest of us to fish along that stretch. It can also mean culturally shared values that involve notions of right and wrong. That one hits the nail on the head of what TreadLightly is trying to get across to folks and create, which is a culture of responsible recreationists that really understand the consequences for irresponsible actions out on our public lands. And with that culture, we believe we all have a responsibility to do our part, but also to bring others into the fold. Take those new fisher people under your wing, mention something you learned to the seasoned fisher person, but work to create a more responsible and sustainable community. Shandy says, Anna, we have a few grandparents in the club. Oh, that's wonderful. Obviously, our youth are torchbearers for the future. Does or will TreadLightly have a kids program in its future? I'm glad you asked, Shandy. We actually have a youth program, and the Forest Service really loves the materials. Let me see if I can get you a link. I know it's out on our website under, I think it's under programs and then youth, but you're absolutely right. Kids are the future. And I'm gonna touch on that point just here in a little bit. Does TreadLightly have paid staff? How is it organized? So TreadLightly is a nonprofit. So yes, we're an established organization, but we don't, falling under the nonprofit sector, we're a 501c3. Does that sort of answer that question?
The reason I ask is because Sandy Flycaster is kind of operated entirely by volunteers.
Yeah.
But other organizations have both staff and volunteers. I was just curious about how you run your organization, how you're organized.
Definitely. Yeah. So we do have staff. This is definitely a full-time job, working with land management across the region. So my program, is Region 6 for the Forest Service, which covers Oregon and Washington. And then the BLM Region 9 covers even more territory. It covers Idaho and into Montana. So I'm working with all of those land managers as well. So yes, we do have staff. It's a good question. It's it's so tough to decide whether to have staff or go with volunteers. I know that volunteers get maxed out and burnt out, and it's tough. It's definitely tough. Okay, I'm gonna jump back in. Great questions, guys. Thank you. All right. Here we go. So TREAD is an acronym for travel responsibly, respect the rights of others, educate yourself, avoid sensitive areas, and do your part. There's a lot to these, you guys, so hang with me here. Travel responsibly. This happens both on and off the water. Most of us take vehicles to get where we're headed to fish, and that's where it starts. With anything motorized, whether that's a car or an RV or dirt bike, you want to make sure that you're sticking to the roads and trails that are open for motor vehicle use. Something that's becoming more common is how close we are to residential areas when we're out recreating, making sure that we're taking care to mind our speed, our dust, and also where we're parking goes a long ways towards respect for the locals. Just like roads and trails, waterways also have designations for what type of crafts are allowed. I know many of the smaller lakes, for example, don't allow gas engines, only electric motors under a certain amount of power. So it's a good idea to grab the local regulations and check if your craft or engine type are permitted or not. We want to make sure we're complying with signage and barriers. So on land, this might look like no parking signs or roadblocks. Out on the water, there might be warning signs of obstructions or dams. There might be emergency signage posted that a lake you're at isn't fishable because of an algae bloom. And then if you're out boating, there's all the maritime flags and signage that you'll need to be on the lookout for, as well as buoys. I'm sure this goes without saying for all of you that head out on watercrafts, but please carry a life vest for everybody on board. And with kids, if they're around water, whether that's a boat or not, it does not hurt to throw the vest on them just in case you turn their head and they take a tumble or go running. I used to lifeguard, and I can't tell you how many littles I fished out because they either just booked it away from their parents or mom and dad were turned dealing with the other kid, and it always well-intentioned, but fishing a scared little kid out of the water is not fun. I already mentioned being respectful when it comes to speed in your car, but that also applies for boats. So the ethics surrounding hiking allow for a little bit more leeway than the ethics for motorized use, but the concern's still the same. We want to make sure that we're leaving as little impact as possible. On land, many of the social trails or trail braids along the banks and shores can lead to bank instability, and they can cause erosion issues. So it's ideal if we can use pre-established pathways or just to take care when we're walking to make sure that it won't have an impact. And then you guys know, once we're in the water, we want to make sure that we're not trampling fish habitat. I know there's a lot of people that enjoy the solitude and peace and quiet that fishing brings. That said, one of our components is to buddy up. So having a buddy can be a safety net in case anything happens, right? Whether you fall into the river and need help, or maybe you have a medical emergency, something along those lines, it would be great to have help. I'm assuming that a lot of you fish from the banks or just wet wade, but I know that there's folks that use boats to access fishing as well. So I just want to quickly touch on a couple of those points. Have a designated lookout for other boats and people. Keep it low key. Don't jump wakes, cross them at low speeds. Again, partnering up, buddying up helps your odds in a bad situation. Don't mix boating with drugs and drinking. I'll leave that up to you guys. And then make sure to balance your load on your trailer, as well as the things you have stowed inside your boat. Respect the rights of others. So this one's pretty straightforward. Be nice, respect others, and respect their outdoor experience. Do you guys see a little Shandy? That middle photo has a little Shandy. So we want to make sure that we're being respectful, whether we're going through a residential area to get to our spot, whether we're out along the waterways, or maybe we're just hanging out staging or the campground. Some of the ways we can practice being respectful are being courteous and leaving room for other fisher people. I know it happens, but my least favorite type of fishing is the elbow to elbow combat fishing. You might land a fish, but I feel like it just takes away from the experience of getting outside and enjoying your surroundings and really connecting with the land and the fish. Same thing applies to boating. Be sure to give the other crafts some room. Again, sometimes it's not always possible if an area is being heavily fished, but stay on top of managing your craft, keep your eyes open, and watch out for other folks' lines. Another way we can practice being respectful is practicing boat ramp etiquette. I'm not going to ask you guys about your boat ramp horror stories because I know we'd be here all night, but don't be that person. Just be efficient and be ready when it's your turn. As many of the folks on here already do, I'm sure, practice catch and release. Only keep what you need. It's good to mind your fight, not overstress or injure the fish. And this last point is a little in depth, but stick with me. It's always important to know if you're on public land or not. Oh, I've got a question. Yeah, dude, boat ramps. Yes, be efficient. Don't be that guy or gal. Yeah, so knowing whether you're on public land or not, obviously, if you're on private land, you're trespassing. Now, when we're out on the water, that's a little confusing. So it's important to check your state regs on what's considered public or private along the waterways. What I've found for Oregon, and this is per the Oregon Department of State Lands, quote, "The public is allowed to use the surface of a waterway in Oregon for any activity unless the waterway isn't wide, deep, or long enough for a boat to pass along it, or unless the activity is illegal. Allowed uses include fishing, navigation, recreation, and other activities requiring the use of water." Quote. And then further, you're allowed to fish below the high water line. Quote, "The ordinary high water line is defined by Oregon state law as a line on the bank made by the water when it rises to its highest level each year to the limit of upland vegetation. It is not the flood line." Quote. So if you want to look into it more, I posted the link here on the slide, but I can always forward that link later, or I'm sure Shandy can help as well here. All right. Educate yourself. This one's also pretty in-depth, and in-depth for any kind of adventure, any kind of activity, but it really means taking the time to plan ahead and prepare. So while it seems like we should be able to just pick up, head down to the river, throw some line, there's regulations in place regarding needing license, the season, fish length, equipment type, so on. So it's important to grab a copy of your state fishing regs, which should be available both in paper form at, your local fly shop or sportsman's shop, as well as online. And then you'll need a fishing license. If you get caught without your license, it means fines or revoked privileges, loss of access. Same sort of thing applies for land travel. It's good to check with land management on which roads or trails are open to your type of travel. For anything motorized, those maps are most commonly called a motor vehicle use map. And then making sure that you have the correct parking permit so you guys don't get tickets. And then while you're checking with land management on maps and regs, it's also a good idea to ask about or look for, in the alert section for any closures. Sometimes roads might be closed from a wildfire or a flood or a landslide, which would kind of end the day. And then with anything in the back country, like alpine lakes maybe, we're seeing more and more remote spots switch to the permit system. So you'll have to double check if the area you want to visit is in a permit area. Some other good things to consider are having a plan and letting somebody know about it, and having a plan B in case you get to your spot and it's packed, checking the weather and planning your clothing and equipment appropriately, and then make sure you threw your fishing license in with your gear. And again, I know some of you do and don't use boats, but I just want to touch on a couple points for boating as well. Making sure your craft is mechanically up to the task, making sure your engine is tuned to avoid excessive noise and exhaust, carrying a spill kit for accidents, carrying tools to make in the field fixes. Same thing goes for your trailer. Just do a quick walk around, make sure your lights are working. If you're in a state where you need a license plate, make sure your tabs are up to date, I guess. And then depending on the type of craft you have, you may need to get a boater's license. So it's good to check on that. There might be times when you need to file a float plan. I learned that recently in my boater's class. I had taken a boater's class before, but I guess I hadn't remembered that. So kind of jogged my memory there. And it seems obvious, but pack enough fuel or power or whatever it is for the trip. Packing emergency items for both you and your craft, like a first aid kit, flares, learning distress signals in case you need help. And then one that we all forget come sunny season is exposure is super high when you're out on the water. So make sure you pack sunscreen, plenty of water to drink, and be cognizant of heat-related illnesses. I know I just listed off a ton of things, you guys, but the idea is just to get your wheels turning, get you planning ahead. I'm sure there's other things that I didn't mention that you'll think of that you would wish you would pack or remember. I keep a list when I'm going camping or dirt biking. I've got a checklist. Doesn't hurt. Avoid sensitive areas. When we're on land in our cars, this is where staying on the designated roads and trails really comes into play. The impact a heavy vehicle can have on a fragile area is bad, really bad. We want to make sure that we're not treading on any sensitive areas like meadows, lake shores, wetlands. I already mentioned this as part of the travel responsibly section, but it also applies to avoiding sensitive areas as they're so commonly one and the same. So again, if you can, just staying on designated trails is always helpful, but if you're going to trek out into open country, there's a couple things you can do to minimize your impact. So if you're hiking, spread out. Don't walk single file because that beats in a new path. Look ahead and try to plan out where you're going to walk and make sure that it's not going to leave an impact. So what this sort of makes me think about is I like to play in alpine areas. So staying on the trails, critical with the dirt bike. But even when I get off the bike and I'm walking around, so much of the plant life at the alpine level is fragile, and it provides a necessary resource for wildlife. And it has such a short growth season that if I damage it, it could be really detrimental. And then speaking of the backcountry, motorized and mechanized contraptions are not allowed in designated wilderness areas. I usually run into signs that mark out wilderness, but it's up to us to carry a map and know where we're at. Per our national regulations, You can have a boat in the wilderness areas, but it has to be carried in by foot or pack animal. So if you want to take a sup or an inflatable kayak, or if you're feeling up to it and want to carry a canoe, you can totally do that. Obviously, no engines. And for those interested in the nitty-gritty details like I am, I posted the regulation there. Some other things to be aware of: we want to avoid breeding areas, nesting areas, reds. Again, it's just as much about the land as it is the water here. We want to be respectful of cultural artifacts and archaeological sites and leave them undisturbed. Wildlife. Anybody who's been close to a wild animal, you know, it's kind of a magical thing. It's a feel good. But when we have control over those experiences, we want to give the wild animals some room, so we're not disrupting the natural order of things. I see, you know, YouTube videos and TikTok videos of people feeding birds from their hand and petting deer and feeding them, and it not only domesticates them and it takes away their natural fear of predators, but it can make them reliant on human interaction and feedings. So it's good to just use the rule of thumb. You want to make sure that you're far enough away from wildlife that you can close an eye and cover them with your thumb. Just a couple quick notes on boating and avoiding sensitive areas. It's important to launch in designated areas. Backing our car down a riverbank and a lake shore can be extremely erosive and damage the area. We also want to avoid boating with motors, at least in water that's less than 2.5 feet, and minding our speed and wake around the shorelines, just being cognizant of the effect that we're having on the river banks. There's these new mini drift boats, and I've seen them in all of 6 inches of water, and in my head I'm just going, oh man, that's disrupting fish habitat, or, you know, they're getting close to shore and creating a wake. So again, going slow and trying to travel in a little bit deeper of water with our motors is helpful. Do your part. The doing your part section is sort of the catch-all for ways that we can do better by the fish, by the waterway, and by land in general. Some of the ways we can do better by the fish are using barbless hooks. Another good one is using knotless or rubber mesh nets, which are a lot easier on the fish. And they also increase the post-release survival rates. And then once you got a fish on, you guys know this, but always make sure to wet your hands before handling the fish so that you don't remove their gooey protective coating. I know we all love pictures with our fish, right? But we want to make sure that we've only got them out of the water for 30 seconds at a time, and definitely for no more than a minute total. And then when we're holding them, we want to hold them horizontally. If we hold them vertically, it can cause fatal injuries. Some of the ways we can do better by the waterway. First, foremost, and probably the easiest way is anybody can help is by picking up garbage. I was actually going to skip mentioning this because it seems like such an obvious thing to do, but I had sort of a light bulb moment when I was headed up the road to my house on Wednesday. There's a decent amount of garbage lately in the ditches that run alongside of the road, and those ditches have little springs and creeks that dump into them. And then where does it go? It goes directly down into the Columbia. So even picking up the garbage in your neighborhood and along your local waterways and wetlands has a trickle-down effect that helps our waterways overall. And in that same thread, we obviously want to pick up garbage in the areas where we're fishing. It's important there, especially because so often garbage and abuse will lead to closures. And, you know, it doesn't have to be a huge cleanup effort that requires dumpsters and tons of people. Granted, sometimes that's needed, but I've got some overlanding friends, folks that, use a 4x4 rig and do the rooftop tent thing. And when they roll up to a campsite, they spend the first 15 minutes before they set up camp at all, picking up garbage. Just 15 minutes and a small garbage bag go a long ways. It would be super easy to do that on the front or back end of, heading down to the river to fish. Kind of along the same lines as picking up garbage is making sure we pack out discarded fishing line. Honestly, this is one of my biggest pet peeves, is seeing snips of fishing line or somebody that just left their line along the riverbank or even out in the water where it could be easily retrieved. It drives me absolutely insane. So when I'm snipping line after tying on a new fly or changing out my line, it goes right back into my bag or my fanny pack or a zippered pocket of some sort. If you do opt to keep your catch, the methods for disposal of the entrails are to either tag it and bag it, dispose of it in 25 feet or more of water, or to bury it 100 yards or more away from the waterway or camp or trails. I personally prefer flies the majority of the time, but if you're going to use bait that's native to the area. The last important one is remembering to wash down our rigs and boats and gear so that we don't contribute to the spread of invasive species. As far as how we can do better by the land, something that's not specifically mentioned in the TreadLightly tips, but that Shandy brought up to me was having seen a lot of broken glass lately. Obviously, having water and drinks and food is important when we're out fishing, but broken glass and plastic even is super dangerous for us and for the wildlife. I personally don't even use the plastic Nalgene bottles because I'm kind of a klutz and I've broken a few, and I can tell you that those pieces are sharp. So my go-to for drinks now is a metal bottle. For food, obviously the options are a little more slim and plastic bags are sort of wasteful. I guess what I'm trying to say is just be mindful of the things that can break and the impact that those pieces can have on everyone and everything around you. So I've covered a lot about the fish in the waterway, but if you're planning to camp or hang out on land around the waterway, I think it'd be great for you guys to check out the TreadLightly ethics regarding hiking and camping. Those dive into some of the specifics on where to camp, how to manage campfires, how to deal with going to the bathroom outdoors. I never thought we would have had to have this conversation publicly, but it's become a thing. There was actually some trails in Northwest Oregon that shut down for a period of time during the height of COVID because they were finding excrement out on the trails. Pretty gross, but yeah, so we can teach you how to go to the bathroom outdoors. Yeah, so just jump out on treadlightly.org and the rec tips are all right there at the top on the homepage. So at the end of the day, there's 3 things I really like for everybody to take away from the do your part section. Mindfulness. Just being aware and mindful about our actions is an easy way to do our part. When we're present in the moment, always thinking about our impact, we make better decisions, which ultimately leads to less impact and better sustainability. Stewardship. Giving back is the real focus here. Stewardship can take a lot of forms. Sometimes it's a big project, sometimes it's a small project, sometimes it's on land because we all access the waterways via land. And sometimes those projects are actually out on the waterways. You can give back by doing cleanups, and those you can either do with yourself or in a group. There's always opportunity to get involved with a larger conservation and restoration effort. Those are coordinated generally by the land manager. But what really hit me hard recently, I was out working on a trail system, and the amount of work that just me and my boyfriend gotten done in one day, if every single enthusiast, regardless of what your activity is, spent just a day or even a half day out volunteering, things would be way cleaner and in way better shape. We really have the opportunity to take some ownership and carry on a legacy of beautiful public lands that we're proud of and that we're proud to hand down to our grandchildren. Which brings me to the last thing I'd like you to take away from this, and something that Shandy brought up earlier: education. When we're thinking about passing down fishing to our kids or our grandkids, we think about teaching them how to cast properly, or how to tie flies, or how to read the water. But it's about so much more than just teaching them about how to fish. It's teaching them how to fish responsibly and with the fish and the land in mind. For every action, there's an impact or a consequence. How we treat the fish and the land today directly affects our opportunities in the future, as well as the access we're granted in the future. So mindfulness, stewardship, and education. And you guys, that's what I've put together for you. I appreciate all of you tuning in. Oh, I see a question in the chat. Oh, you're so welcome. I'm going to turn myself back on now. Okay, hopefully I've got the bandwidth to do this. Perfect. I'm so passionate about what I do. I came to TreadLightly having already been a passionate advocate and volunteer, and this is the perfect position for me. It's a passion project. It's personal to me. So I'm thankful that you guys all tuned in to listen. I know it's a lot of information, especially in a short time. Does anybody else have any questions for me?
I do.
We'll invite people to unmute themselves so they
Hello.
don't have to use the shout now that we're completed. I'll go to standard view and oh my goodness, we got people in the waiting room. No.
Oh no.
There we go. A couple people came in late, I guess. Todd, okay, sorry, guys. I just saw you in the waiting room. I thought everybody was in. Sorry, Beth. Sorry,
no.
Todd. I didn't see you there until I
No,
just gave up.
I've been in.
I
I've
did-
been in.
Oh, okay, well, good. I'll go ahead. Feel free to unmute yourself and ask questions if you'd like.
Yeah, I got a question for Anna. What's your position on dogs in the wilderness and out in the wild?
I'm going to refer you back to your land manager's rules. If it's
Who's
posted,
my land manager?
it depends on if you're on Forest Service land, or maybe you're on Fish and Wildlife land, or state land, or BLM. It just sort of depends on where you're at, but always following the rules that the land manager has laid out is important.
It's kind of a pet peeve for me because I think the outdoors, a lot of us have been around for a while, and I appreciate and understand why everybody wants to be out, especially in COVID. You know, it's beautiful out there. That's why I want to be out there. But we're really loving this resource to death. And I see people with, you know, they bring their dogs, they're everywhere. That excrement on the trail is probably, it might be dogs. They're chasing the wildlife. I have 2 dogs that I dearly love, and everybody knows me that I'm a dog guy, but I don't take them when I go fishing. I don't take them when I go camping. People don't want to hear my dogs bark, don't want to see my dogs run through their campsite. And they certainly, and I can say this from experience, they don't want to step in their dog poop.
So Todd, what you're saying to me is you want people to be respectful when they've got their animals with them.
or don't,
Sounds like a respect issue.
they don't belong out there, I don't think, personally. And I know a lot
They're
of
great for
it's
retrieving.
yeah. Retrieving what?
Well, when you're
Ultimately-
hunting,
Ultimately, it comes down to respect.
Well, hunting, yeah, that's different.
It's up to the animal owner to be respectful, right? They should have their animal leashed and they should be picking up after their animal and controlling their animal. It sounds like
Yeah.
people you've encountered aren't very respectful.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess that's it.
And I think, you know, that issue of respect sort of spreads out into everything we do, right? Like we wouldn't have issues with other trail users or with other fisher people or people with their animals necessarily if they were more respectful, if we were all respectful of each other and mindful of each other.
Well, you got a point there.
But you
I
bring up a
agree
good
with-
point. But yeah, definitely check the regulations because animals aren't allowed everywhere.
I agree with you, Todd, when you go around if you're around the campgrounds and stuff, you know, where people are not picking up after their family, which is the dogs are their family too.
Or leaving behind garbage.
Yeah.
Right? It's just like you wouldn't do that in your mom's yard.
No.
Who else? I know you guys have got questions.
I'm going to invite you all to unmute. So there's going to be a little button, button up on your screen. You can just click that to unmute so you don't have to try to figure out where your mic is. And feel free to ask any more questions.
Well, it's really hard to, you know, if you see somebody who's really abusing things, rarely out in the woods do you want to approach them. You know,
Yeah.
I've seen people go up and nearby and just pick up their stuff and put it into a sack and walk off with it, which is kind of a good way of showing maybe what they should be doing.
Right.
But it can be pretty nasty out there when you get somebody who really doesn't care, you know, unless you can find a number on their boat or something like that, or on their car and report them.
So, I mean, TreadLightly's stance on that is if you can have a positive and an educational interaction with another person, like absolutely. And I mean, it all is in how you approach them. But obviously there are those situations where they don't look friendly or maybe they get defensive right out the gate. I mean, we don't want to be reporting our neighbors, but enforcement is there as an option. But if you can have an interaction that's positive and educational, like Shandy knows, I put myself out there quite a bit personally, educating people, and they don't always like to hear it, but I try to be as positive and nice as I can about it and just informational, right? Seem over informational. So that's a great point. We have to educate people somehow, whether it's us or the land manager or someone else.
Steve, Chuck?
Yeah, Anna, what projects do you have in this area that one might want to get involved in?
So I was actually talking with Shandy about this a little bit. You know, you guys do outings. I would love to do some sort of cleanup or restoration effort with you guys, like before an outing, you know, spending a half hour or an hour cleaning up where you're going to fish. I think that could have the most meaningful impact for you guys because it's somewhere that you really care about. A lot of what I do is in the OHV world. So I've got Jeepers and dirt bikers, and we're going out and doing cleanups in the woods, or we're, you know, repairing trail tread. But for fishing, garbage is really like the number one thing.
That sounds like a wonderful idea. And having been in the Greenwater area a few times, when I used to live up that way, oh my God, to do anything that cleans up from the people who disrespect that area is an incredible effort. And thank you for doing that.
It's the tissue flies like cotton in the wind. It's wow. Yeah, I'm planning a couple cleanups there this spring and summer with a couple of 4x groups, Conquest Overland and Off the Grind. I actually had a conversation with them this week, trying to pin down some dates. So we'll be out there.
Thanks for doing that.
Yeah.
I think that's a great idea because I think if you come into a clean site, you're less likely to trash it. But if you come to a site that's got garbage all over the place, you're less, I think it just sends the wrong message. So cleaning up so that it doesn't look like, well, everybody else is doing it, is a great idea.
Leading by example. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, set a good example.
Oh, Shandy's in the waiting room. Her battery died.
I let her in.
Okay.
I did let her in. She's joining us now. Yeah.
Okay.
Welcome back.
Yeah, I'm on a Mac, so I get text messages on my computer.
Okay. Anybody else? Well, thank you, Anna, very much for your inspiring talk and your kind reminders.
Yeah, and I know most of the people that are sitting in on this aren't necessarily the people that need to hear it, but my hope is that, you'll talk to your friends, you'll talk to your family, and maybe even some of your online acquaintances, and eventually the people that need to hear it will. But we got to try.
It's a good reminder for all of us.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. This was an absolute pleasure. And hopefully I get to throw a line with some of you guys at some point.
Yeah, I hope
Well,
you
your
can join us.
organization has a real good somebody there that can really put the message out. Thank you.
The whole team does a great job. It's just Pacific Northwest is sort of my region. We've got people all over. We've got a gentleman down in South Carolina. We've got people in Utah. We've got somebody who manages California. Our executive director is in Arizona. Our assistant director is in Wyoming. We're all over the place, but that way we can really get eyes on the situation and make an impact in our specific areas.
Awesome work, Anna. Thank you so much for being our presenter. Very well done.
Thanks, Shandy.
You're welcome. And to the club members who are still online, we have a really special guest next month. John McMillan will be discussing his new role with the Wild Salmon Center, I believe, no longer with Trout Unlimited, and his new adventures in Russia coming up. So very, very cool opportunity to hear him speak.
And we will be down at the Broadway Commons for those of you who want to join us in person. And we'll also have the Zoom. So we'll be back to hybrid mode next month. So read more about that in the upcoming newsletter.
Very cool.
Okay, well, I guess we'll sign off then.
All right, you guys have a good night.
Thanks, Anna.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
guys.
Night.
Bye.